Okay, now we're recording. So here we go. Wait, can you guys see? No, you can't see. I need to share screen. There we go. All right. Is that better? You guys can see? Okay. So if y'all will remember, we left off yesterday. We talked about what it meant, kind of what health was, the definition of health, since that's one of the overarching topics of class. And so health is, physical, mental, social, spiritual, all of these sorts of ideas of well-being. Okay. And one of the things that we know that plays a really, really, really important role in sort of moving us from negative towards positive health is an idea of fitness or physical fitness. Okay. And so the original definition in some ways of particularly physical fitness, right, is the idea or the ability that you can perform muscular work satisfactorily. And you're all probably saying, Dr. Black, what the hell does that mean? Okay. What is muscular work? How is it performed satisfactorily? Like, what does that mean? Okay. And so what I would ask everybody is, where you're sitting right now, if you're sitting, stand up. Okay. Wave your hand over your head. Okay. So we stand up, we sit down, we wave our hand over our head. If you were able to do that, then you satisfactorily performed the muscular work required to stand up and to wave. Okay. As we will see, okay, all movement derives from muscles. Muscles are, as from the muscle physiologist point of view at least, muscles are arguably the most important physiological tissue in our body. Okay. And because without them, other stuff doesn't work and doesn't happen. But you contract your muscles, you generate force that allows you to move. And if you are physically able to perform the movement that you want, then that means you have the level of fitness. You are fit enough to perform that task. Okay. So fitness in many ways is relative. Okay. It's relative. And so probably a better definition is that you have attained some ability that permits acceptable performance of a given task that requires a specified physical, social, and psychological sort of component or part of your environment. Okay. Anything that you are able to do, then that means you are fit enough to actually perform that task. And so we think, and we tend to think of fitness like from an athlete standpoint. Are you fit enough to run a marathon? Are you fit enough to squat 800 pounds or some other ridiculous kind of strongman feat or something like that? And that's one way to look at fitness. Okay. Another way to look at fitness is from a health perspective, though. Do you have an ability to do things that can make you healthier? Can you walk? Okay. How many of you, and this is not you don't have to give us like kind of details, but I'm just going to pull up the screen here. How many of you guys have taken a shower this morning? Like wave at me or something. You took a shower this morning. Okay. A few of you took a shower. How many of you went to the bathroom and like brushed your teeth this morning? Okay. All right. So we're not going to talk about hygiene or any of those things, but that requires a certain level of fitness. Okay. How many of you have ever hurt yourself, broken an arm, hurt a shoulder, broken a leg, done something where things that you do in your normal daily life, like walking, getting into and out of the shower, getting onto or off of the toilet, brushing your teeth, combing your hair, feeding yourself, okay, became more difficult, right? It requires a certain baseline level of quote unquote fitness to do these tasks of daily living, to do tasks where we need to go out and walk so that I can expend some energy to work off those Doritos that I just ate, or to tax my heart, get my heart rate up, which is going to help my heart be healthier and lower my blood pressure. So we're going to spend a lot of time. We're going to talk about kind of high-end fitness, right? increasing muscle mass, making you super strong, increasing how the cardiovascular system functions, increasing metabolism and mitochondria in your muscles that are going to make your endurance capacity go up. That kind of performance-related fitness is what most people that are y'all's age tend to think of, but we're also going to spend a lot of time talking about health-related fitness. Can you do things that are kind of basic needs that are going to help make you healthier? Okay, so we need to make that distinction, but really fitness just means, can you perform a particular task, right? So we were learning from before, like, I am not fit enough to hop down the street on one foot without falling down right now. I don't have that level of fitness, but I can walk, so I'm fit enough to walk. And so fitness is this very kind of multifaceted idea. All right. Does that make sense? Because if that doesn't make sense, guys, then everything else we're gonna do today we're gonna have problems. So I need to make sure that we're all at least on the same page with that. Again, a couple of nods of heads. Okay. Very good. Okay. So in class for us, okay, we're going to tend to focus on what's really going to be these 5 primary components that are going to determine fitness. Okay. There's something called cardiorespiratory fitness. And this is an ability of, let's just say, your heart, your lungs, your blood vessels, and your muscles to all work together to provide you some level of endurance capacity. Okay. So cardiorespiratory, can you sustain whole body aerobic metabolic driven exercises for some prolonged period of time? Okay. People that have better cardiorespiratory fitness can run longer, they can run faster. Okay. They could swim, they could bike longer and faster. I will show you guys data when we get to all of this. Okay. The way that we measure cardiorespiratory fitness is with a variable called Vo2 Max. It's the volume of oxygen that is consumed by your muscles that can be brought in from the air through your lungs, through your heart, and got into your muscles and used in a minute. Okay. Of all of the things that we can measure, okay, of all of the things that we can measure physiologically, if I was to measure the Vo2 Max, and we will estimate it in one of our labs next week for you guys, the person in class that has the highest Vo2 Max is very likely going to live the longest. The person that has the lowest Vo2 Max.
Let's jump in on who's going to live the longest.
I'm sorry, Savannah? Okay. So, but there we go. That's kind of what we've got with that. So high Vo2 Max, you're going to live longer. Low Vo2 Max, you're not going to live very long. And we've got a lot of data on all of that, and we'll talk a lot more. Another thing that we're going to do at the end of this week, kind of as the first part of our labs, is going to be muscular strength. This is just how strong you are. That's one other component of fitness. Okay. You need strength to move around. You may not think of it that way, right? But because most of you guys have plenty of strength to move your body weight, but there are some people that aren't strong enough to stand up out of a chair, to carry their own groceries and do things like that. Okay. Additionally, muscular strength can predict mortality. People that are stronger tend to live longer. And it's not kind of because they're stronger, it's because they can do some other things, but that's going to be a part of it. We're going to also look at something called local muscular endurance. And this would be like, how many push-ups could you do, or how many sit-ups could you do in, say, a minute or 2 minutes or something like that, kind of consecutively. Okay. It's not exactly running or biking, but it's going to be this kind of muscular endurance component, kind of contractions over and over again without fatiguing. We're going to measure that as part of lab. Again, this is something that if you're going to kind of do daily living activities, not just kind of sporting things, that we need to have some level of this. The last couple are going to be flexibility and body composition. We're not going to spend a huge amount of time on flexibility. One, because I think it's dumb, and two, because we don't have a lot of data on flexibility. But for people that have a normal ability to go through certain ranges of motion, flexibility doesn't matter very much. But where flexibility becomes a part of fitness and as it relates to health is people that have injuries or have pain or have arthritis or joint problems or something that they cannot move an arm, a leg, their neck, something like that, through a full range of motion to allow them to do normal activities, walking, running, carrying things such as that, then lack of flexibility can have some very severe impacts on health outcomes. Okay. The last one is body composition. And we talked about yesterday to some extent that especially having excess body fat is going to have really, really negative health consequences. And so understanding how we measure body composition, how we figure out how much muscle, how much fat, how much mineral you have in your bones and things, having a more positive body composition in some ways can, where you have more muscle, less fat, and higher bone mineral density can have some very helpful things to do with kind of overall health and everything. Okay, so that's really in some ways how we want to define fitness. Okay. For those of you that care about performance in athletes and things, then we have some other classes that you can take, and there's a whole sort of a whole other section of stuff that's going to be really, really, really important from a quote unquote fitness standpoint that are going to be much more task specific to athletes. Things like agility and coordination. Okay. This idea of muscular power. So how much force can you generate and how quickly can you generate it? People that have lots of muscular power can run faster. They can jump higher. Power is really, really important for a lot of sports and those things where you have to move very quickly over short distances. Speed and reaction time, balance, kind of all of these things together are going to let you not necessarily just be able to do normal things, but to do stuff required in sports that are going to require much, much higher levels of all of these kinds of things, or very specific kind of skills for a particular sport. Okay. And so in some of our other classes, you guys will talk, you can take the advanced strength and conditioning class, you can take the advanced endurance training class, they'll spend some time talking about how we specifically could train to work just on these things. Some level of this we would also say is going to be health related. Okay. You need a certain amount of coordination to walk, to get in and out of the bathtub, right? To be able to bathe yourself or brush your teeth. You need a certain amount of balance to be able to stand without falling over. And there's going to be some issues that happen with this, especially as we age. They're going to make we're going to get below a normal level of these things. And then that becomes a health related fitness thing. Okay. And we'd already talked about some of these kinds of things over here a little bit. We will do individual sections of class. Okay. We will talk very specifically about the physiology that underlines cardiorespiratory and cardiorespiratory fitness. We'll talk about the individual kind of underlying physiology that determines muscular strength and muscular endurance. And we'll talk about the things that go into, say, body composition. So this is really just kind of an introduction that this is where we're going in class. These are the ideas and the concepts that are important to us. And we'll keep working from there. Okay. All right. Okay, so let me pull up lecture number 2, okay? So what's going to end up being a recurring theme throughout class is this interaction that we have between physical activity, health, and fitness. Emma, yes, you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, is this lecture also posted to Canvas, or would you be able to post it really quick if we want to use it to take notes?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Have I not loosed that for you guys yet?
I don't see it, but I'm very blind, so that doesn't mean
that's okay. All right, we are recording again. You guys can see everything, yes? All right, so the other big piece of things as it relates to health and fitness is the idea of something called physical activity, okay? And so there's been these really, really big push by some of our national organizations, the American Heart Association, the American College of Sports Medicine, maybe less so by the Centers for Disease Control in the federal and state governments, to try to talk about and educate people about what is physical activity and why do we not get as much physical activity as we used to, and how that is causing lots of problems, because when I get more activity, it tends to improve my health, and it also tends to improve my fitness. And then if I'm not very active, which many people, maybe not so much you guys in y'all's age range, but as you get into my age range or your parents' age range, activity declines, and then it has these kind of really deleterious effects on health and fitness. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the impact here, and then I'm going to have you guys, we're going to put you guys into some breakout rooms, and y'all are going to do a little exercise and try to figure out kind of what is activity, how would we define it in the best way, and then how are we going to measure it and quantify it, because you guys probably get quite a bit every day. Okay. So I really enjoy this picture. One of my colleagues found this and put it in a lecture. But I love that we're riding the escalator up to go to the fitness center. In some ways, this is in many ways kind of an encapsulation of suburban American life in a lot of ways. That through the goodness of technology and the internet and things, we all have these desk jobs, and we drive everywhere. And then when we go someplace, we have these automatic stairs or something. And so we have taken a lot of physical activity out of our lives in ways, and that has had a very profound impact on our health. Additionally, and so here's a thing that was written back in the in the late 1950s. I think it was published in 1960 by John F. Kennedy, who said that we are under-exercised as a nation. We look instead of play. How maybe prescient that was in the age of Instagram and TikTok. We ride instead of walk. Our existence deprives us of the minimum of physical activity essential for healthy living. If he thought that in 1960, he would be amazingly sort of shocked and appalled at where we have gotten to here in the 2020s in the midst of that. But this has been an idea that has been at kind of the forefront of things, get outside, move, do things, whether they completely understood all of the kind of physiology that would underlie the positive benefits of these things. We've known for a very, very long time that people that move more rather than less tend to live longer and have healthier and more fulfilling lives. Okay. The problem is we've known this for so long and we still don't do it. And that's going to be kind of one of the other big themes of class. Okay. So if John F. Kennedy was talking about this in 1960, then one of the first times that we had actual hard data on a large data set of people to demonstrate kind of the science that would underlie his potential statement that being less active is in fact bad for us, came from something called the Harvard Alumni Study. Okay. And so when this paper was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is arguably the best scientific journal, the most prestigious scientific journal in the entire world, in 1986, there were about 17,000 men that had been enrolled in the Harvard Alumni Study. And so the Alumni Study was exactly what you think it is. It was begun in the 1960s. And what they did was they took people that went to Harvard, and we can argue until we're blue in the face about whether or not people that go to Harvard are exactly indicative or representative of the regular population, but we'll take the data where we can get it. They would make some measures and they have data from women as well, but they would measure them like the year they were graduating, and then they would call them and do a follow-up basically every year. And they would ask them questions like, do you have diabetes? Do you have high blood pressure? They would ask them questions about what kind of job they had, how much money they made, this whole kind of slew and battery of things. And what they found then was that over the course of basically 25 years, these 17,000 men, okay, what they were looking at was that about 3,000 of them passed away over the course of this 25 years they were initially following them. And what they were interested in was, are there some characteristics that the individuals that were dying had in common that maybe separated them and made them different from the ones that were still living? Okay. And so you can imagine these are people that's only 25 years. A lot of these people, the mean age is only 46. So these are people that are in their mid 40s to kind of late 40s. They're, kind of my age in that way. Really, really, not a group of people we would expect to have really high mortality rates. And so what they found from looking at all of this was one of the things that was the single best predictor of sort of all-cause mortality was a lack of non-vigorous and vigorous, what we would call physical activity. And so what this means was individuals, and they broke it down by how many kilocalories per week of physical activity did you get? So how much energy were you expending doing some kind of physical activity every week? And so imagine a kilocalorie is what we think of as a regular calorie. Imagine that walking or running a mile expends roughly 100 calories. And so if they looked, if you look at the data here, individuals that were expending less than 500 kilocalories, so less than 5 miles of physical activity per week, they were the reference category. And then if you look at folks that were between 500 and about 2,000 kcals and those that were over 200 kcals, if you look in the age ranges, what you're going to see is that their risk of dying over this age period went down. And so if here were our references, then people that were 35 to 49 who expended 2,000 kcals per week had about a 20% reduction. So they're about 80% as likely to die over the course of that 25-year period as the people that had very little physical activity. And so what we know now is that this is very common. We have lots more data on all of this. There's not just the Harvard alumni study. There's multiple other very, very large data sets. There's what's called the Nurses' Health Study. There was a study that was conducted where they have data from, and it was mostly men in the beginning. They were ticket takers and bus drivers in the double-decker buses in London. Then they have folks that were office workers, and then the guys that loaded the ships and that worked in the harbor in one of the docks there in San Francisco. We have all of this data, and it all shows basically the same thing. If you are more active, then your all-cause mortality is going to be better. Then you're going to have less chance of dying from anything than people that are much, much less active. Okay. And so if we look at this, it tends to be cardiovascular disease, cancer, stroke, and especially type 2 diabetes. These are some of the leading causes of death. These are the places where being more physically active seems to give us the largest kind of bang for our buck in reducing mortality risk, okay? So cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death in the US. It's the leading cause of death in the world. And we have about a 50% reduction. If you are more active, you're about half as likely to die in any year from cardiovascular disease as somebody that's not. Okay. For certain kinds of cancers, we may get a 20 to 30% reduction. For stroke, it's 20 to 50%. Type 2 diabetes. Most people that have type 2 diabetes actually die from cardiovascular disease. So we're going to get this reduction in diabetes deaths as well. And then kind of a concurrent reduction in cardiovascular disease risk. So the big take home from all of this is being more active, okay? Being more active is better for us. It reduces chronic diseases and it reduces our risk of dying from these particular chronic diseases, okay? Think about this in another way, okay? Let's think about this in another way. If we were in person, I would do this, but I won't have you guys do it now, but I want you to think of the 10 people in your life that you care about the most, okay? Think about them, all right? 10 people you care about the most in your life, okay? 4 of them are going to die of cardiovascular disease. Another 2 of them or 3 of them are going to die from cancer, and then probably 1 of them is going to die from stroke or from diabetes, okay? Wouldn't you like to spend more time with those people? Wouldn't you like to have an ability to get this extra, if you're going to have this extra physical activity, it tends to add maybe 2 to 3 years onto their life. It reduces their risk of dying prematurely. Think about it in those terms, okay? if all we have to do, as I will show you guys, is go out and walk a little bit every day. That's all you've got to do. You don't have to go to CrossFit, although that would be great. Grandma doesn't have to go to CrossFit, but it would be good if she did. Okay. All we have to do is go out and walk. Go walk the dog, go for a walk, spend 20 or 30 minutes every day. Park your car farther away from the grocery store. Park at the back of the parking lot at Walmart and walk in. Okay. Park on campus someplace that's a ways away from, wherever you need to be. And we get to spend more time with these people that we care about. Okay. Try to make this real in your particular life. Okay. So the other piece of this, okay, that I want to show you guys. So these are some data. So anybody familiar with, there's a place called the Cooper Clinic that's in Dallas. Any of you guys that are from the Dallas area, it's called the Cooper Fitness Center, the Cooper Aerobic Center that is there. But it's basically like a big workout facility. And Dr. Cooper, who was an MD, is actually an OU alum. We've still been trying to get him to give us a bunch of money to build a new building, and he won't do it. But that's another topic for another day. These are data from the Cooper Clinic. And so what they do at the Cooper Clinic is when you're going to go and start exercising there, they do a full workup on you. They measure your muscular strength. They measure your cardiorespiratory endurance. So they get not only how physically active you are, they get some measures of physical fitness. Okay. And in this measure of physical fitness here, this is going to be what they're using is that Vo2 Max measure. So a measure of cardiorespiratory endurance, so kind of endurance capacity. And what I want you guys to look at here is this is relative risk of all-cause mortality. So dying from anything. And we're people that are in sort of the 25th percentile. So this is the sort of the least active and least fit people are here on this left side of the graph. And the people that are in the 100th percentile, so these are the most fit and the most active people over here. What I want you guys to notice with this is what we call a dose response, okay? And a dose response is very simple, okay? Think of a dose response this way. I have 1 glass of wine, no big deal. I have 2 glasses of wine, and I'm a little tipsy. I have 4 glasses of wine, and it's time for me to go to bed or something like that, okay? Alcohol in your system works in a dose response in the same way that physical activity and physical fitness work in a dose response to prevent mortality rates. The idea that a little bit of physical activity gets you a little bit of an improvement. A lot of physical activity gets us a much larger improvement. Okay, that's the idea of what we call a dose response. And so what I want you to look at, though, is look at this difference between people that are active and then our actual measure of physical fitness, okay? I can be very physically active, but yet not be very fit. I can be active if I walk and do those things a lot, but actually not be, I could be down here on this fitness curve. And so what we really want, if we want to drive down our relative risk of all-cause mortality, but specifically of cardiovascular disease, is we need to try to improve our level of aerobic, our cardiorespiratory endurance, our cardiorespiratory fitness. And we'll talk about how we do that with running or biking or swimming and kind of what the needed amount of kind of time per day and intensities and things are going to be to do all of that, okay? So walking is good, running would be better for us. Okay, if running is good, running fast and far is even better than kind of all of that. All right, so that's kind of where we are. Here's the problem, though. Okay, here's the problem. Close to 70% of adults in the U.S. are obese. Okay, or at least are overweight, and about 40% are obese. Part of this is because we're not very active. But I want you to look at this. In 1960, about 11% of Americans were obese by BMI, had a BMI of 30 or greater. Okay, lots of excess adipose tissue. And it has steadily risen as we go through here. Okay, boom, 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 boom. Here we go, right? There's this big, very precipitous jump right here in sort of the mid to late 90s. What do you guys think happened there? What happened in the mid to late 90s? Wait, let me back up. When were you guys born?
98.
2001.
99.
98, 2001. Okay. What happened in those years kind of immediately preceding when many of you guys were born? I'm now appalled at my age, right? Well, the internet while I was in college. That's right. I remember going to my dorm room and being so excited when we moved in the fall of 1996 that we had high speed at the time, non-telephone driven, like non-using a modem internet. Okay. Let me just tell you guys this sort of just the wildness that was with everything, because we had internet. One of my high school buddies, his older brother was a computer science major, and they started a dial-up internet company. Like they were the ones that provided the service in our hometown. We're like one of the first places, and they did that in like 1995. And you could call in on the modem, right, and it would occupy your phone line and those kinds of things. It was wild. But the internet, with the advent of the internet, what did that do to jobs? What did that do to how I could work and where I could work and what I did in my leisure time and all of these other different things, right? I didn't go outside anymore. There's no need. I could sit on the internet and play video games or search for things, right? And you could work from anywhere. You could work from home. You could work from your office and kind of have better connections with people all around the world and those kinds of things. And so as this has happened, as kind of the way that we work and the way society works has changed, obesity rates have gone up. And a lot of that is going to be due to decreases in physical activity. Okay. Okay. So here's the piece of this though that I want us to focus on. I think you guys may remember that I told you yesterday, right, that having excess body fat is bad for us. Okay. Well, it is very difficult to change body weight. It's very difficult to get people to adhere to diets. All of the dieting literature tells us that you do something and it works for a while, and then we look a year later and you've gained most of the weight back. It's very, very difficult for people to make kind of significant life changes in this way. And there's a host of reasons for all of that. So you can take that in some ways as this is bad news, right? Because we are obese, we're becoming more obese, and there's not a lot that we can do about all of it because there's Chick-fil-A everywhere and Zaxby's everywhere, and who doesn't want that? But these are maybe, okay? These are maybe the most important data and the most important concept that I'm going to share with you guys in the entirety of class. This is the thing that potentially is going to have kind of the greatest impact and the greatest driving factor in sort of having good health consequences in all of class. Okay. So what you guys see here is this is again what they're calling adjusted relative risk. This is your risk of dying. This is all cause mortality, your risk of dying from anything. Okay. And they took people, and these are data again from the Cooper Clinic in Dallas. And this is a subgroup of about 14,000 men. And so they measured their waist circumference, okay, in centimeters. You guys will see when we get to body composition that measuring waist circumference is actually a very, very strong predictor of obesity rates and of cardiovascular disease rates. And so we have what are in essence our folks with a low, okay, or a smaller waist circumference. It's less than 87 centimeters. Let me do some math really, really quickly here. 87 divided by 2.54. No, 87 divided by 2.54. That's a waist circumference of about 34 inches or thereabouts. Okay. So guys, if you wear pants and you're a 34-inch waist, somewhere in there, that's what this group is. Then we have what they're calling moderate, which was 87 to 99, and then their kind of largest or highest waist circumference, which is greater than 99 centimeters. And then they broke them, so they split everybody into categories based upon waist circumference, assuming the larger your waist circumference in general, the more obese you are. And that's a reasonably okay kind of supposition. And then they split within each of those groups, they split people into either having a relatively good level of fitness. This is cardiorespiratory endurance. So this is Vo2 Max again. high fit, low fit, high fit, low fit. So high fit is in yellow or gold, and the lower fit is in the pink. And what I want you guys to look at is, look out here. My folks that had the largest waist circumference, that had a relatively high level of fitness, which is going to be because they were very active. They were exercising quite a bit. Obese, but high fitness, they have lower all-cause mortality rates than people that are normal weight or kind of normal waist circumference or smaller waist circumference, but they do not have high levels of fitness in that way. Okay. And they're better off here. You see the same thing at moderate, the same thing here. So the big take home from all of this, the one thing that I want you guys to take from this is the idea that obesity is a problem. Being obese predicts cancer rates, it predicts type 2 diabetes, it predicts cardiovascular disease, it predicts all-cause mortality. But if I am more active, or if I am active enough in a way that I can increase my cardiorespiratory fitness, I can make fitness go up, then fitness and activity trumps obesity. Okay. I can, for the most part, counteract almost all of the negative effects of having excess body fat simply by being more active and by being more fit. Okay. And so I hope you guys can kind of see the good part of this. It doesn't matter. We don't have to exercise and diet to try to lose weight to get good health outcomes. We just need to exercise. We just need to be active, period, full stop, end of discussion. And we're going to reap a lot of benefits simply from doing that. And that's one of the things that we need to do a good job of as MDs selling to their patients. You guys will find doctors know almost nothing about exercise. They don't know how to prescribe exercise. They don't know what exercises to do, right? But doctors need to know better about all of this. People, you guys want to be physical therapists. You want to be occupational therapists. You guys are going to have roles to play in encouraging people to try to be more active and to do those things rather than in changing weight doesn't matter. We need to do a good job of getting this information out, because I think this is going to be a thing that can be really helpful for everyone. People don't want to do stuff. Oh, I'm not going to lose weight. I'm not changing how I look and those kinds of things. Yeah, but you're going to live longer, right? And so I think that can be a really, really powerful thing. Okay. So what I'm going to do now for the moment, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to recording back on. So let's start off by talking about what physical activity is, right? And this may be a thing that everybody's like, I kind of know what it is, but it maybe sometimes be hard to put a hard and fast definition on it, okay? So let me look at our groups. So Julia's group wrote that physical activity is any movement that you do daily that isn't planned, maybe not, that increases heart rate and allows you to burn more calories. Okay. So some kind of unplanned movement increases heart rate, burns more calories. Let me look. Nia's group said any movement performed voluntarily that causes an increase in energy expenditure. That is shockingly exactly, I think, what is written in the notes. So you guys did a very nice job of going down like one slide and finding an answer, but very, very similar, right? We measure energy expenditure in kcals, okay? Let me see. Addie, you just wrote group 33, so I don't know like what you guys had. And then Gavin put the people that were in your group. But we need the actual kinds of things. So that's okay. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm hopeful that most of you guys got, we think physical activity needs to include continuous movement, intensity of the activities, the amount of time they were active, asking about them, the physical activities, Vo2 smartwatches. Okay. So Addie, for y'all's group, my question is just, that's fine, but how do we measure intensity? Right? Like if we said like, what's the one thing that makes something physical activity? We need to we have to have a way to kind of get at this a little bit. And the first two groups were 100% correct. Okay. So what I'm going to do let me share my screen really quickly. I'm going to try and see if I can write on the screen while this is going. But you guys, if you went forward on my things, right? Nope, it's not. There we go. Can y'all see that? I tried to write on, I can see it on my screen. Can y'all see that I wrote on there in red, like highlighted things? No.
No.
Well, son of a bitch. Okay, well then that doesn't make
Oh, wait,
any,
I see it now.
you guys see it now? Maybe it's just slow and it's coming in late with everything. But physical activity, we define physical activity is any bodily movement. Okay, Emma drinking there, that's physical activity. Any bodily movement produced by muscles that results in a substantial increase in energy expenditure over rest. So the thing that makes something physical activity is an increase in energy expenditure. All right. Several of you earlier, before we did our group things, were sort of luxuriously kind of stretched out, like on your couch or something, lounging. We'll call that resting energy expenditure. When you're there and you're doing nothing, your body's still burning some level of calories. You just sleep all day, which sounds awesome, right? You still have to burn some calories to be alive. Physical activity is anything where you move, but it raises your metabolic rate. It uses energy above that. Just think, I'm just Netflixing and laying on the couch all day. That's it. That's how we're going to define what physical activity actually is. Okay? So, good. Physical activity is anything. Ooh, Nia, you have a question.
Would you measure like physical activity like with heart rate, if your heart rate goes up, or would you measure exercise by like heart rate?
Great question. Give me just a second and we will get there and we'll get an answer to that question. Okay? That's a very good question. So any movement that raises energy expenditure is physical activity. Okay? So I'm doing this, physical activity, right? If we were in class and you guys didn't, and we were in person and you guys were annoying me and not wanting to talk, we would all make all of you guys stand up and we'd go down into like a deep squat and hold it until somebody answered a question. That's the great equalizer for getting people to not be shy. That would be considered physical activity. Exercise is a special case of physical activity. Okay, so well, now it's not writing on my end. Exercise is physical activity. Like, so not all physical activity is exercise, but all exercise is physical activity. So when you go to exercise, it's activity that is planned, okay? And it's done with the specific purpose, okay, to try to maintain or improve your physical fitness. All right. So I'm doing something to make myself stronger. I'm doing something to alter my body composition. I'm doing something to make myself more flexible or to raise, say, my cardiorespiratory endurance. Okay. So exercise is a special case of physical activity. And that's how we're gonna be able to split out in some ways why certain types or certain intensities of physical activity are better for us from a health standpoint than just kind of the basic, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna walk. Okay. All right. So the next thing that I asked you guys was, how do we measure all of this? So let me see if I can do this. So how do we measure how active you are? Okay. So Nia, I know you had mentioned that one of the things that we could try to do was we could potentially try to measure heart rate. Okay. So how many of you, and I was doing this a little bit, how many of you have an Apple Watch or a Fitbit watch? Oh no, my watch is wanting me to do something. I don't know. Oh, like it's actually recording it on the watch. Like it thinks I'm trying to like record a message. I don't even know what I'm doing here. Okay. I've never felt more like my father than when I have to deal with this technology and things now. How many of you have a watch like this? Right? Okay. What does the watch tell you? Like I can click on, let me do this, right? I've not had my watch on all day today, but like I can click on this thing on my little circles, right? And it will tell you stuff. What is it measuring? How does it know what it is that you've done to know what's going on? So maybe it measures your heart rate, okay? But what else is it measuring? Does it measure energy expenditure?
It measures steps. How many
It measures steps. Okay. Nia, we're going to write on here steps. How does it measure steps? How does it know when you're taking a step?
like a pedometer type of thing?
So a pedometer would do that. But like if I do this and I just start swinging it, is that going to think that's a step?
No.
Maybe.
It might, right? How does it know?
It's just basing it on like, because your arms are supposed to move back and forth while you're walking. So if your arms are moving back and forth, it thinks you're walking.
So does it think I'm walking right now? It might, right? Okay. Heart rate, steps. Can you guys think of a way to measure energy expenditure? If the most ideal way for us to quantify physical activity is to measure energy expenditure, how would we measure energy expenditure?
How many calories you've burnt?
Yeah, how would I? That's right. How would I know how many calories I burned?
You don't really know. For
Okay.
sure.
My watch sure tells me how many I've burned, though, Nia. It wants to tell me something. I'm out there running, being like, ooh, I can eat that whole bag of Doritos now. I burned 800 calories at Orange Theory last week on one day, and I came home and just ripped into some ice cream. That was Friday. It was a good day, right? But how does it know? So
Is
we'll
it
look at
based
these
on
two.
like,
Oh, go ahead, Emma.
I was just say, is it based on like your heart rate at like you burn a certain amount of calories based on like your weight and your heart rate for whatever amount of time? Is it kind of based on that? Is it just doing math?
It is doing math, yes, in the background. So what I will tell you guys, and just so that we can try to move on a little bit, is that there's not a good way, right? It's very hard. I'm just going to write this on here. Very hard to measure. I'll abbreviate it EE. It's very, very hard to measure energy expenditure. Okay. We could have Jessica get up and do 10 jumping jacks, and we would assume that that was some level of physical activity, that her energy expenditure did go up, but we don't have a good way to quantify that. Okay. Probably the best way to quantify energy expenditure is to measure heat production. So how much like heat comes off of your body. We're very metabolically inefficient. We give off a lot of extra energy as heat. So we could do that. But again, that's not feasible, right? Like we couldn't like put a heat chamber in your house and just have you exercise there, or like walk around in the midst of all of that. Your body's really good at trying to maintain a certain kind of stable core body temperature. So you go and you run and you get a little bit warmer, but you start sweating. And so your body wants to get rid of some of that heat. So we can't actually quantify it that way. So energy expenditure above rest is our truest measure of physical activity. We can't measure it very well. So what we do is we're going to look at variables that are also going to change when energy expenditure changes. So if energy expenditure goes up, that's going to be very much related to an increase in heart rate. Okay. And so I'm walking, I'm undertaking some steps. That's going to raise my energy expenditure. That's going to cause my heart rate to go up. And as Emma said, yes, if we know roughly how tall you are and we know roughly how much you weigh, and even more so if we knew your height, your weight, and your kind of relative body composition, we knew how much muscle mass and things that you had, then we can get an estimate from that as to how much energy expenditure is required to move you at a certain speed. And basically, as we make more energy in your muscles or in your mitochondria to let you move, that drives an increase in the cardiovascular system so that you're going to send more blood to a certain place. So that's going to go up. Your breathing's going to go up. So we're going to measure, say, heart rate and use that as a way to estimate or kind of get a general idea of what your energy expenditure is going to be. Okay. And so that's one of the things that your Fitbit or your Apple Watch, or if you're doing things on, say, a bike or a treadmill, and they want you to hold on with your hand, and it's going to measure your heart rate and those things, and it knows how far you've gone and to ask you to enter some information. That's what it's doing, is a reasonably kind of simple calculation based upon those things to try to estimate how many calories you've burned. Okay. So my question, Aaron, how accurate do you think that is? If I put this thing on and it gives me my heart rate, one, how accurate do you think it is? at measuring my heart rate? And then 2, how accurate do we think it's going to be able to estimate caloric expenditure simply from my heart rate?
So personally, I have, sorry, I have an Apple Watch myself.
Mhm.
So from my own experiences, I think it it does depend, honestly, on where you have your watch. If it's like, if it's on your wrist, I know that there's like certain pressure points and stuff that measure your heart rate better on your wrist. So it could be fairly good at measuring your heart rate depending on where you have your watch. But like from my own experience, I've been like sitting down, or especially when I exercise,
Uh-huh.
it shows elevated heart rate and stuff. So I think it's fairly good at measuring, but it's not 100% accurate, and it's never going to be 100%.
Okay.
I agree with
Nia, I
that.
see you. I'm gonna get you your question in just a second. Okay. I'm sorry. Someone else was going to contribute?
I just said that I agree with what she's saying because sometimes I'm just sitting there and
Mhm.
it's not accurate.
Right. I was trying to get mine on to see what mine was right now. So, so we have some regular heart rate monitors in the lab, and then you guys have them available for use in class. And we've done some sort of quasi-scientific things. We had a capstone group that put on a real heart rate monitor that you wear around your chest and compared it to somebody in their group had an Apple Watch, and they went from like sitting to walking to jogging to running fast. They compared their Apple Watch to a Fitbit watch, and they found that it did reasonably well. Right, like there are going to be some times when it's not super duper accurate, but that it did reasonably well. So what you guys have to appreciate, and what I kind of the point of all of this that I want you to take away is that it's hard for us to quantify physical activity, okay? Because we can't really measure energy expenditure. So we have to measure a surrogate in heart rate. And there's going to be some error in measuring heart rate. And then there's going to be some additional error in converting or trying to convert that increase in heart rate to a kind of measure of an increase in energy expenditure. So when your watch says, right, it says your heart rate's 160 beats per minute, it may be 155, it may be 165, right? So there may be some wiggle room in all of that. So then appreciate that if it's using that to say you've burned 230 calories on your walk today, that there may also be some give and take in all of that. And I promise you, from my sort of month of having this since my birthday anecdotal experience, I feel like it tends to overestimate on caloric expenditure, which would probably be a good thing, right? Like they would want you to feel like you're accomplishing things and all of that, but it probably tends to overestimate. But that's okay. It's better than nothing. Right? It's better than nothing. And we guys that are taking lifestyle intervention, having something that gives feedback. I know what my heart rate is. I know how many steps I've taken today. I know how much distance I've covered. Some people are really motivated by closing the rings, right? Like, ooh, I'm a competitive person. I'm not. I just feel bad. Then when I haven't done shit, I'm like, oh, I'm the worst person in the world. But other people are really motivated. So I think there's some good from all of this. But this is kind of this idea when we talk about how active people are, we can do
There's
it
some
in
good
ways like
that
this.
comes from it too, because like I challenge my friends with like
Oh,
the
yeah.
ring.
Mhm.
So like with the rings, you can like challenge your friends, and like me and my friends were very competitive, and
See?
it kind of is incentive to
Absolutely.
do more.
No, that's really great, Savannah. That's one of the things that I think we're beginning to learn in some ways about behavioral change and physical activity behaviors, is that we know that people are motivated by doing things in groups. We like to do hard things when there are other people that are suffering with us. And some people are very competitive, and you're like, ooh, I'm gonna get more than my roommate. I'm gonna beat my friend, right? When my wife is more that way, she's like, I'm gonna get more steps than you today. And I'm like, I honestly don't care in those kinds of things. But like my wife she wants to get her 10,000 every day. Like she walks around in the bedroom at night if she's close and she hadn't gotten it. And I'm like, just sit down. Like the difference between having like 9,800 steps and 10,000 is really not that significant, but that's what she wants to get it. So, okay. Nia, you had a question.
I was just gonna ask, So basically we can only get an estimate of like our energy
So-
expenditure.
Yeah. So if you come to my lab now, in the lab, right, we have machines that, cost, we have a device that's called a metabolic cart, and you breathe, we collect all the air that you breathe out while you're doing things, and we run it through some gas analyzers, and we measure oxygen and CO2 in the air. And so if we know how much O2 and CO2 is in room air, and we know how much is in the air that you're breathing out, we can calculate basically from the increase in carbon dioxide production how much oxygen your muscles are using in the lab. But that machine costs $20,000, and they make portable ones that will like fit in a fanny pack, and then you wear like a mask and you run around on campus in a mask, which is I'm sure what everybody wants to do. We can, through that, get a very accurate estimate of energy expenditure. We don't have one in Oklahoma. At the medical center of the University of Arkansas in Little Rock, they have a heat chamber, and it's just a room, and they circulate water through these pipes all around in the walls, and they have you just live in there for like a week, or you exercise in there, and it measures how much heat comes off of your body. It warms the water up this tiny little bit, and they can calculate from there. So we have ways to do it very, very accurately. They're just really, really expensive, and they tend to be very cumbersome for us to kind of collect usable large scale like data on everybody. So, if you want to come to the lab, we can put you come in, like we can give you your resting metabolic rate. It takes about a half an hour. You come in the morning, you haven't eaten, and you just lay down and take a nap for a half an hour, and we just have you breathe normally, and we measure your O2 consumption, and we can tell you what your resting metabolic rate is. Okay. And then during exercise, we can hook you up to the metabolic cart, and I can give you very, very accurate things about like how much energy you're actually doing, but we have to be able to collect the gas that you're breathing in. So that makes it cumbersome to run and cumbersome to bike and those kinds of things. But we can get it. It's just, it's just not kind of widespread feasible, if that makes sense.
So the machine you're talking about, is it like professional athletes when they're on a treadmill and they have it on their face?
Yes, it is. That is exactly what it is. Yes.
Okay.
I tell people they used to show them on like the Gatorade commercials and those things where people would be like running, they got all these tubes and things coming off. That's exactly what it is. Yes.
Thanks.
So, okay. Good questions. So did anybody come up with a different way of trying to quantify how active you are or how active you were yesterday? Jenna, did you exercise yesterday?
No, I didn't, but I did walk around and do other stuff. I just didn't like run or anything.
You did walk around, okay?
Yes.
So could we ask Jenna some questions about her walk to try to get at and figure out how much energy she expended during her walk? Do we think that's possible, guys?
I would say, like, how much did you sweat? Did you
Okay.
sweat at all, or was it just like a sedentary, like just walk to the kitchen and back, or
Okay.
how much did you walk?
We could
I would
also. Oh wait.
No, go for it.
Answer.
Okay. I was about to say we could also ask, like, did she walk on an incline or was it like a flat surface?
Okay. An incline or a flat surface. Did she sweat?
How fast the pace was.
Okay. How fast? Aaron, did you have something you wanted to throw in?
Yeah, we could ask like how long did she walk for exactly? If it was like a 2-minute walk to like the kitchen, or if it was like a 30-minute walk intentionally.
Okay. Pace.
One thing we talked about in our group too is you can ask like how difficult did that feel? Like, was it something that like made you start breathing really heavy and stuff? Because one thing we talked about is that like something that's really difficult for someone who's like morbidly obese is not going to be nearly as difficult for someone who is like more physically fit. And so part of it is like, do you feel like that walk was difficult? Or, because like I know that when I go back home to Colorado and I try to run and, act like I'm like really fit and stuff, I can't run for longer than like a minute, and I'm like dying because there's no O2. And so.
Right. So yay, altitude, right? So Jenna, how long did you walk yesterday?
I would say it was probably anywhere from about 20 to 30 minutes. Honestly, I was
20 to 30
shopping and
minutes?
running errands, and it was like
Okay.
outside. So
Okay. Were you sweating? Just maybe.
yes,
Okay.
because it was 100 degrees.
Because it was 100. That was going to be my thing for Savannah is what if we're doing this like at the North Pole where it's really, really cold, right? And your idea of sweating because energy expenditure raises body temperature and things is really, really good. That's really on point. But there may be some environmental factors that are gonna kind of make that not as sort of as accurate as we would like. Jenna, do you know what your pace was? Like, was it fast? Was it slow? Was it, super slow? Like how would you describe that?
I mean, if I had to pick a number, it'd probably be like 15 minutes a mile, something
Okay.
like that. It was kind of medium. It wasn't super fast, but it wasn't slow either.
Super slow. Okay. Okay. Julia, you have a question?
Yes. So I know that many people talk about when you exercise in hot temperatures because you sweat a lot that you're burning more calories. But I've also heard that, yeah, exactly. I've heard that if you exercise in the cold weather, you actually burn more calories because your body's trying to like also warm itself while you're exercising. Is that accurate? Or how does that work? Because I mean, I know that sweat is not really like, doesn't really tell you much about how.
Mostly like water weight.
So good questions, everybody. I'll try to give a really quick, the answer is not super duper simple. When you are cold and you shiver, that's physical activity. Your body will try to burn energy to release heat to warm yourself back up. And so when you are very cold, you're either going to involuntary shiver or do some of the things that you're doing to try to keep your core body temperature up will burn additional calories than if you were in a place where it was not quite so cold. So that part is true. If you're exercising when it's cold versus exercising when it's kind of neutral, kind of moderate temperature versus hot, it does take a little bit of extra energy to try to dissipate some heat and those kinds of things. But that additional increase to either warm yourself up or to kind of cool yourself back off it's not completely negligible, but it's probably not enough to have a real kind of meaningful difference in kind of what you're doing during a given bout. There's some fascinating research on drinking cold fluids versus drinking kind of tepid room temperature fluids, that when you drink something that's cold, you have to warm it up to get it to where your core body temperature is, and that actually burns some extra calories. But it's like 2 extra calories for drinking, like half a gallon of cold water or something. So, I mean, it's a real thing that happens, but it's not something that is maybe, if you're interested in sort of weight loss or maximizing energy expenditure, that it's kind of a tiny fraction compared to the other stuff that you would be doing. So that makes sense.
So is technically exercising then at the same intensity, let's say the same exercises whenever it's hot versus when it's cold, you're pretty much burning the same amount of calories? Okay.
Pretty close. Yeah. Pretty close. Emma?
Just on the note about like water, I also heard that like if you drink like ice cold water compared to room temperature water, that the room temperature water will hydrate you better because you like don't have to warm it up or whatever. Is like that a thing, or is that crap?
Now, whether it will, I don't know the answer on sort of gastric emptying time or absorption time on the ability to get room temperature water versus cold water sort of from the stomach into the intestine and then get it from your small intestine actually out into circulation. I don't know if having to warm it up, if the warming is something that would occur in the stomach or the small intestine prior to absorption or not. That'd be a pretty easy thing to look up, but no, like water is water and it's going to come in and it moves based upon hydrostatic and oncotic pressures and those kinds of things. And temperature doesn't really drive it one way or the other in any way, shape or form. So it's one of those things that sounds great, like as an idea or something like all of that. Like the myth when I was younger that like if you mix alcohol with Gatorade that it gets absorbed faster or something, which is just completely silly. in the way of all of that. The way the digestive system works is not kind of driven that way. There's nothing special about Gatorade or hot water or cold water that I am aware of. So, okay. Let me move on to a couple of other things. So what we were trying to get at, my point of things, let me get back a little bit on task. Thank you guys so much for the good questions and kind of contributing with all of this. We're going to get back to our question about what Jenna did yesterday. One of the other ways that we're going to get information on how active people are is we're just very simply, we have to ask them. Okay. When we ask people things, we call this self-report. And so we asked Jenna very simply, okay, how long did you do something? And to get a good self-report, we need to know the time that they spent doing it. Okay, we need to know what it was or what type of activity it was. Was it walking? Was it running? Was it biking? Was it swimming? And then we need to know the intensity of it if we want to get a really good, accurate estimate of things. Okay, and so what I'm going to have you guys do for class for tomorrow is you're going to keep a log of everything that you do for the rest of today that you think qualifies as physical activity, and you're going to have to try to quantify for me the time and the intensity and things, whatever it is that you're doing. Okay, so as Jenna said, she was walking around, she was running some errands, she thought it was maybe 20 to 30 minutes. Okay, so we have a time, we have a type. The intensity portion, this is the piece that's going to be the most difficult thing for us to try to get at and to measure. Okay, and so to understand intensity, we need to understand energy expenditure. So let me move on. I'm going to go to another kind of clean slide here. Okay, but if we were to look at things, okay, I'm going to draw a graph like this, as this is going to be the idea on the x-axis. If we're measuring energy expenditure and we were measuring heart rate, let's just say that as energy expenditure increases, heart rate also increases, and it looks kind of very linear like this, okay? And our measure of intensity, our way of getting intensity of a particular activity, okay, the best way to measure intensity is the delta or the change in energy expenditure or the change in heart rate, okay? So if we want to know, if we send Gavin out to go for a run, if we want to know whether it's very intense or kind of moderately intense or only kind of very, very light and very easy, we need to know how much change in energy expenditure in there, or therefore how much change in heart rate is he going to experience during that bout, okay? In the absence of being able to measure that, though, we can ask people what it was that they were doing and make some kind of very rough assumptions. We're going to make some rough assumptions that walking is going to fall, let's just say like walking falls here, running falls here, running very fast falls up like that or something, okay? And so when we do all of this, we can kind of break out the intensity into several, what we're going to tend to call domains, okay? And these energy expenditure domains, most of the time are called light, moderate, and then vigorous, okay? And they're going to tend to correspond like this. So like light is here, moderate is going to be here, and then vigorous is going to be up like this. So if you have some relatively small increase in energy expenditure or small increase in heart rate over rest, that's going to denote activities that are considered light in intensity. And so because it's light, then we can make some guess at, you did light walking, right, for 30 minutes. That probably means you burned some number of calories, okay? Walking slowly and things that are maybe the equivalent of walking slowly or less than that, okay, are going to be light intensity activities. I can't necessarily give you an increase in heart rate or a very specific increase in the amount of calories over rest that are going to quantify that, but that's kind of the general gist, okay? Light intensity activities, you're not going to experience any increase in breathing. You're going to get a little bit of an increase in heart rate, but not a lot. It's not going to feel like you're exerting very much, okay? Moderate intensity activities are going to be what we would think of as maybe walking briskly, okay? Walking enough that when it's 100 degrees out, you're going to sweat a little bit, okay? But you could still carry on a conversation with somebody, right? You're not necessarily, breathing has gone up, but it's not so much that you're kind of unable to carry on a conversation and you're going to lose your breath if you're trying to like walk around with someone, okay? Most people, when they walk or do things that are like that, that's kind of this moderate intensity thing. For some people, if you jog very, very slowly, okay, or if you swim and you're just barely kind of going because we're pretty buoyant in the water, that may be moderate intensity activities, okay? But just think of walking as kind of our base, kind of normal to quick walking is our base for moderate. Light intensity is brushing your teeth, taking a shower, walking around your house, loading and unloading the dishwasher or something like that, very, very light. Vigorous intensity activity and above, okay? So vigorous and then everything kind of on up out here, that's going to be jogging or running, and then everything where we're going to jog fast or we're going to sprint or we're going to bike and we're going to do something kind of beyond all of that, okay? So that's how we would tend to break these things down. So if we want to know from a questionnaire standpoint how active you were yesterday or how active you are in general, we need to ask you, because all of this counts, we need to ask you, how much light intensity activity did you do yesterday? Like how many minutes did you spend doing basic housework or getting, ready to go to work or something, brushing your teeth, those kinds of things. We need to ask, here are activities that are considered moderate. Were you doing like normal walking? Maybe you do moderate stuff. Let's say you work as a waiter and you walk around a bunch and you're on your feet a bunch as part of your job or something. Then that you would get a lot of moderate intensity activity from that. Okay. And then vigorous, most exercise where it's planned tends to be vigorous. If it's not vigorous, we're not doing enough. And we'll talk about that tomorrow to some extent. Okay. Okay. So there were a couple of questions. Julia, did you have a question? No, I answered it. Okay. Anybody else have a question before I hop on to kind of how much of this we need for it to be kind of have these nice positive outcomes for us? Nope. Okay. All right, so we talked about energy a little bit, this kind of stuff. This is pretty straightforward. So when you look at your daily energy expenditure, okay, we're going to try to figure out where do we expend energy in our everyday lives. A lot of it is what we would call resting metabolic rate, okay? It's this kind of piece that's down here in red. This is your basal metabolic rate. You need to make ATP and you need to run physiological processes in your body in order to stay alive. And so there we go. That's where maybe 60% to or thereabouts of your daily energy expenditure comes from. If you want to have a higher basal or resting metabolic rate, you need more muscle. Okay, you need more muscle. So I'm just going to write this on here. More muscle equals increased basal or resting metabolic rate. Okay. And when you guys take Exercise Phys with Dr. Mike or with Dr. Campbell, you guys will talk more about kind of how we measure the differences between resting and basal metabolic rate, kind of how and why muscle mass matters so much in the midst of all of this. The general take home is just that muscles use energy. So if you have more muscle, you will use more, burn more calories on a daily basis. That's one of the really good things about doing resistance training and having more muscle. At least if you're me, then the more muscle I have, the more I can eat. and those kinds of things, right? It's a good way to kind of get at some of those things. And we'll talk about some consequences of loss of that in the fall in metabolic rate as we age and how that contributes to obesity to some extent later on in class, okay? Weirdly enough, maybe about 10% of your daily caloric expenditure comes from digesting food. And so that was always one that kind of blows my mind to kind of work your stomach and your intestines for absorption. That requires energy. And then kind of everything else here in this yellow is going to be what we would think of as physical activity. And that may be physical activity that you get from working, right? From walking around, being on your feet, or depending upon what your job is, like the guys that are outside working, putting up my fence right now, like they're doing physical activity as part of their work, okay? It may be what we call leisure time physical activity. So this could be I went for a walk or a hike or something. It was not planned or structured exercise, but it was something that I went and did. Or maybe you went and played ultimate frisbee or did something with your friends. That's leisure time physical activity. And then the last kind of piece of all of this is what we generally think of as planned exercise, okay? There's some really fascinating research out there on the interactions of how active we are at work versus how much exercise we get versus how much leisure time physical activity we get. There are groups of people, especially athletes, who get lots of planned exercise and then do no other activity. Like they sit on their butts all the rest of the time. Like they get a lot of activity, but it's all from exercise. Like I know I go to practice and I'm getting exercise for like 2 hours a day. And then if you look at me the rest of the day, I've got like, my other 18 hours of being awake. I'm just a total and complete like slug and I do nothing. And there's interest in, is that better or worse than someone that accumulates a similar amount of caloric expenditure, but they don't get it from exercise, but they get it from, say, walking around at work and those kinds of things? Or there's some interest in kind of what's the best way to kind of go about these kinds of things. So we'll speak a little bit about that later on when we get into some of the obesity stuff. So we'll do Emma and then Nia.
So I guess I just kind of had like a confirmation question about like when we're talking about planned exercise, like it's planned if I want to get together with my friends to play ultimate, but when we're talking about like planned exercise, it's I'm going to go and do whatever workout routine, like kind of thing.
Good question. So I should probably just call it exercise. Exercise by its definition is planned and it is undertaken with the specific goal of increasing fitness. And that's how it might be different than like, I'm going to go play ultimate with my friends, or I'm going to go play, soccer or kickball or whatever it is that I'm going to do with my friends. I'm not doing it with the ideal goal of making my Vo2 Max go up or making my strength go up or something. Okay.
So I guess I kind of have like a follow-up question to that, which
okay.
I don't know. Maybe this isn't like a very good question, but what if that is like my ex, he's like been playing a lot more ultimate lately because he's like trying to improve his health. So is it doing both? Is it both?
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably improving his health, and depending upon how fit you are to begin with, we'll talk about this when we get into the training kind of portion, especially with Vo2 Max and things, that if you're really unfit, then any kind of physical activity, even if you don't want it to make you more fit, it will make you more fit. But once you reach some kind of level of fitness, then I can go and play ultimate, but I may not do enough during ultimate to actually push beyond what I'm used to doing to improve my level of fitness, if you think about it that way. And so when we get into kind of these domains and what is needed to overload our systems to get us to adapt, it's really easy when you're not very fit. Like pretty much anything can get you an increase in fitness. But once you reach kind of some threshold levels, then it becomes much more difficult, and you have to be much more intentional about, I got to run at this pace and for this amount of time or this amount of distance to see some actual results.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
You got it. I'm worried about what you're going to do with that information with your ex right now and what the text message chain is about to be or not be, but there we go. Okay. Nia, you had a question.
For the BMR, I know you said like it's higher if you have more muscle mass. Okay, so would that coincide with like having a faster metabolism as well? Okay.
That's the same thing. If you say that you have a faster metabolism, you have a higher or a greater resting metabolic rate. Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. Because like my boyfriend, he's 3% body fat.
Mhm.
And I mean, he's an athlete, but he literally sits down all day
Mhm.
and doesn't drink any water and like doesn't eat vegetables.
Mhm.
And I'm not understanding how so
No, that's 100% a way that those things tend to go. And, part of your metabolic rate is determined by genetics. And part of that there's a genetic component that is due to how much muscle you have, right? Like different people just naturally have more muscle than others. And that may presuppose you to being a better or worse athlete in some of those. There's a lot of selection bias in that, right? And we have to be very careful about those things. But yeah, you're 100% correct. All that I will say, Nia, is that you should tell your boyfriend that as someone that was a college athlete, I hit 25 and my ability to eat whatever I wanted as much as I want, that metabolic rate begins to plummet as those kinds of things happen. So just enjoy it while you can, I guess, with those kinds of things. Okay. All right, guys, we're going to finish up on this one thing here, and I'll try to get you guys out of here. So there is an amount of physical activity, okay, an amount of physical activity that we know we need to get that will be the bare minimum to impart improvements in health, okay? And there are not going to be a huge number of things in class that I'm going to ask you guys to memorize, but this is one of those things. I'm going to ask you about this on the first test. I'm going to ask you guys about this on the final. You're going to get asked about this in other classes, okay? So these are what we call the physical activity guidelines or the physical activity recommendations. And they've been put out jointly by the American College of Sports Medicine and the American Heart Association, okay? And they're published and pushed by the Centers for Disease Control and everything else. And what it's going to say is that if you can accumulate over the course of a week, okay, if you can accumulate 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity, so 150 minutes, that can be 30 minutes per day over 5 days, that could be 50 minutes over 3 days. You can divide that out by 7. It's like 22 minutes a day, right, of moderate intensity activity. So brisk walking, okay? Just go walk at a pretty reasonable pace. 150 minutes of that per week. That will get you to the guidelines. Conversely, if you go at a higher intensity, so you do vigorous intensity activity, okay, because the energy expenditure tends to be greater, you don't have to go for as long. So you can get 150 minutes of moderate or 75 minutes of vigorous per week, okay? 75 minutes of vigorous. That's like 10 and a half minutes of vigorous intensity. Go run for 10 minutes every day and you're getting pretty close to this, okay? That's going to get you enough activity. It's going to expend enough energy to impart benefits on type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, et cetera, okay? Now, that's only half of the recommendation. The other piece of the recommendation from a physical activity standpoint, and this is a newer portion, is that in addition to that, we are really now encouraging people to get 2 days of whole body resistance training, where you're going to do a couple of sets on a couple of exercises where you do maybe say 8 to 12 repetitions on that exercise. And at 8 or 10 or 12 reps, you can't do anymore. So it's reps with what we call failure or fatigue. This is not, I did 8 reps of 5-pound curls with my little dumbbells and I could have done 50. This is, I did 8 reps and I could not do a 9th or something like that, okay? So if you meet these guidelines and you get these things every week and you do that consistently over years and years and years, this will be enough physical activity that will impart these positive health benefits that we've kind of already shown you some data on, okay? And I can tell you there's lots and lots of research where they have looked at to try to figure out. You may ask, well, why is it 150 and not 140? Or why is it 150 and not 180? And why is it this and this? I would be more than happy, if you guys want to come by my office one day, we could spend an hour talking about kind of all of the research that they've done to figure out that these are in some ways the magic numbers. But I can just tell you guys that these are the numbers, okay? Decisions have been made. They've looked at a bunch of stuff. This is kind of where we are, okay? All right, questions about that? Okay, well, let's stop here for today, okay? Let's go ahead and stop here. I'm going to do that. I'm going to